What if the Abyss in Genshin Impact isn't just a dark force trying to destroy Teyvat, but the resentment of entire timelines that were never allowed to exist? That sounds dramatic, but a new rumor circulating after the latest event storyline might have just given us the clearest explanation of the Abyss we've ever seen. And if this interpretation is correct, it completely changes how we understand everything from Durin to the fake Albedo, to why the Traveler can purify abyssal power at all. Because according to the line attributed to Alice in the event, the true nature of the Abyss is surprisingly simple. The essence of the Abyss lies in the hatred carried by all the fates that will not come to pass. At first that sounds abstract, but when you translate it into something familiar to Genshin players, the idea becomes weirdly easy to understand. Imagine you're pulling on a character banner. You're sitting at soft pity, and your next pull has a 50% chance to give you the featured character. Let's say in this example it's Varka. When you click that wish button, one outcome becomes reality. Maybe you win the 50-50 and pull Varka. That's the timeline you experience. But according to this rumor, another possibility existed at that exact moment. In that other outcome, you lost the 50-50. That version of events never happened. That version of fate was rejected. And the Abyss might be the resentment of those rejected possibilities. In other words, the world of Teyvat represents the fates that were chosen. The Abyss represents the ones that were denied. Once you look at the lore through that lens, a lot of strange details suddenly start making more sense. For example, an older text called Lunar Arcanum X describes fortune as something much more literal than people assume. It says that fortune isn't just a metaphor for luck, but the sum of everything that is destined to happen and everything that never will. One half of fate creates the world itself, while the other half gives rise to the Abyss. That idea sounds philosophical, but it actually explains a very specific pattern we've seen across Genshin's story. The Abyss is obsessed with imitation. It reads memories, it recreates people, it produces twisted reflections of things that already exist in reality. For a long time it looked like the Abyss was simply mocking the world, but if this rumor is correct, that behavior might be instinctive. Because if the Abyss is made from rejected possibilities, then its entire nature is built around one goal, proving that those possibilities deserve to exist. And the easiest way to do that is to replace reality itself. Suddenly, some of the creepiest story moments in Genshin start to look very different. Take the story of Durin, the dragon who attacked Mondstadt long before the Traveler arrived. In the lore of the weapon festering desire, Durin is described as something very specific. Not just a monster, but an unfulfilled wish and a tragic dream that could never come true. That description used to sound poetic, but now it might be literal. Durin may have been a possibility that was never meant to exist in Teyvat's destined timeline. A rejected fate that forced its way into the world anyway. And once you start thinking about rejected fates trying to replace reality, the next example becomes even more interesting. The alternate Albedo from the Dragonspine event. During Shadows Amid Snowstorms, we discovered that the fake Albedo wasn't just a simple clone. It had a deep obsession with replacing the real Albedo entirely. It wanted to become the true version that the world accepted. At the time, that motivation seemed unsettling but mysterious. Why would a being created by the Abyss care so much about replacing the original? But if the Abyss is literally the manifestation of rejected possibilities, that obsession suddenly makes perfect sense. The fake Albedo represents a version of events that was never supposed to happen. And just like the rumor suggests, that rejected fate carries resentment. It wants to take the place of the version that was chosen. Even outside of individual characters, the same idea appears in other parts of the lore. There's something called the Wild Hunt, mentioned in archives and story texts. Its origin is described as unfulfilled wishes and deep resentment born from longing. When those emotions are corrupted by the Abyss, they transform into hostile creatures that roam wastelands and attack the world itself. Again, the pattern repeats. Something that could have existed, but didn't. Something that desired a future that never arrived. And eventually, that resentment turns into abyssal power. But if the Abyss really comes from rejected fates, that raises a huge question. How does the world of Teyvat prevent infinite possibilities from constantly spilling into reality? one of the answers might be hiding right above the sky. For years, the game has hinted that the sky of Teyvat isn't real. Some lore refers to it as an eggshell, and certain books suggest it was created by the heavenly principles or the primordial one. According to rumors connected to texts like The Little Witch and the Undying Fire, this false sky doesn't just block the outside universe, it actually stabilizes fate itself. By limiting external influences and reducing unpredictable variables, the false sky keeps Teyvat's timeline more controlled and more deterministic. Fewer branching possibilities means fewer rejected fates, and fewer chances for the abyss to grow stronger. In other words, the false sky might function like a cosmic lid, not just protecting Teyvat from outside threats, but suppressing the very conditions that create the abyss. That would also explain why the heavenly principles enforce such strict divine laws. If the goal is to maintain a stable timeline with minimal variables, then chaos and freedom become dangerous. Too many possibilities means too many rejected futures. And too many rejected futures means more abyss. But then there's one character who doesn't quite fit into that system: the Traveler. From the very beginning of the game, the Traveler has shown an unusual ability to purify abyssal corruption. It's one of their defining powers, but for a long time, the story never really explained how that purification works. And recently, even characters within the lore have started questioning it. Skirk, who is herself connected to forces outside Teyvat, once pointed out something interesting. Power doesn't just disappear. If the Traveler purifies abyssal energy, that energy has to go somewhere. So where does it actually go? One possible answer ties directly back to the nature of Descenders. Descenders are beings whose existence comes from outside Teyvat's predetermined fate. They aren't bound by the world's timeline the same way everyone else is. That means they interact with fate differently. If the abyss is the resentment of rejected possibilities, then a Descender might be uniquely capable of absorbing or carrying that resentment without being consumed by it. In other words, when the Traveler purifies abyssal power, they might not be destroying it at all. They might be taking that rejected fate onto themselves. That would make the Traveler less like a purifier and more like a vessel. Someone who quietly carries the weight of possibilities that the world refused. It's a haunting idea, but it would explain why their power feels so unusual compared to everyone else in Teyvat. And it might also explain why the Abyss Order seems so interested in the Traveler's role in the larger story. Because if someone truly exists outside the system of fate, they might be the only one capable of resolving the conflict between the chosen world and the rejected ones. Of course, right now this entire interpretation is still just a rumor built from event dialogue and scattered lore hints. Genshin's writers love planting ideas years before they fully reveal the truth. So it's entirely possible that a few years from now, we'll look back at this event and realize that Alice's line quietly explained the entire foundation of the Abyss. But if that ends up being the case, then the war between Teyvat and the Abyss might not just be a battle between light and darkness. It might be a war between reality and every other future that never got the chance to exist. And honestly, that raises a lot of new questions about where the Traveler's story is ultimately heading. But I'm curious what you think about this interpretation. If the Abyss really represents rejected fates, do you think the Traveler will eventually resolve that conflict, or will those lost possibilities keep trying to replace reality? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and if you enjoy deep dives into Genshin lore and rumors like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are still a lot of mysteries in Teyvat, and some of the biggest answers might already be hiding in plain sight.